She did not know he owned the company signing her $800 million deal. She poured wine on her husband in front of everyone. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's video, I need your help. We have noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It is quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let us keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. She raised the glass, and in 1 second, the entire ballroom went silent. Now, let us return to our main character. The restaurant glowed with amber light, soft music floating between polished tables and whispered conversations. Every plate looked like a small piece of art, every movement rehearsed and elegant, but to Clara Evans, the young attorney clutching her worn purse, it felt like stepping into someone else's life. Her dress had been borrowed, her shoes had scuffed heels, and her confidence was hanging by a thread. Table 12, she murmured under her breath, scanning the room. Her heart pounded faster than the violin in the corner. At the back of the restaurant sat a man in a dark suit, absorbed in his phone. His posture was calm, his presence commanding yet quiet. That must be the investor she was told to meet, the man who could save her small firm with a single signature. Taking a deep breath, Clara forced a smile and walked toward him. "Hi, you must be Daniel," she said brightly, trying to hide the tremor in her voice. "I am Clara. Thank you for meeting me tonight." The man looked up, startled, a flicker of confusion crossing his face before settling into a polite smile. "Of course," he said, slipping his phone away. "Please, have a seat." She slid into the chair opposite him, relief flooding her. For a moment it felt almost normal until she noticed his watch, sleek and custom-made, the kind she had only ever seen in magazines. "So," she began, "I know these kinds of dinners can be awkward. I am terrible at small talk, but I promise I am better at my job." He chuckled softly, tilting his head. "You work in law, right?" "Yes," she said quickly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Corporate contracts mostly. It is not glamorous, but it pays the bills. Well, most of them." He nodded, his eyes curious. "And what drives you to keep doing it?" She hesitated, then smiled. "Because I believe fairness still matters, even in business." Something in her answer made him pause. He studied her for a moment longer, then said simply, "I like that." The waiter appeared, pouring wine into crystal glasses. Clara reached for hers, hands slightly trembling. As she lifted it, the rim brushed his cuff, and a few crimson drops spilled down his sleeve. "Oh no, I am so sorry," she gasped, reaching for a napkin. But the man laughed an easy, genuine sound that softened his entire face. "It is fine," he said. "I have survived worse meetings." Her cheeks flushed. "If this deal ever goes through, remind me to buy you a new shirt." He smiled. "If you sign it with the same honesty you just showed, you will not owe me a thing." She laughed nervously, unaware that the man sitting across from her, calm, kind, and impossibly composed, was not Daniel, the junior investor she had expected. He was Alexander Reid, the reclusive founder and chief executive of Reid Global Holdings, and the very man whose signature she had spent 6 months trying to secure. Outside, New York shimmered beyond the glass, unaware that inside this quiet restaurant, a small mistake had already rewritten both of their destinies. The next morning, the city woke under a thin layer of fog. Clara Evans sat at her desk in a small corner office that smelled faintly of old paper and burnt coffee. The golden light of early morning slid across stacks of files, highlighting the exhaustion on her face. The meeting from last night replayed in her mind like a song she could not turn off. She had gone home dizzy from adrenaline, convinced she had finally impressed the investor who could save her firm. The firm itself, Evans, Cole, was barely surviving. Rent was overdue, 2 assistants had quit, and the landlord had already taped a red warning notice on the glass door downstairs. Clara had built this place with her late father's savings, believing that law could still be honest, that people deserved fairness even when they could not afford it. But the last 6 months had been brutal, clients backing out, lawsuits delayed, invoices unpaid. The only thing keeping her going was the hope of one major deal, the Reid Global merger worth $800 million. If she could close that contract, every debt would vanish overnight. The firm could stay alive, and the people who trusted her could keep their jobs. That was why the dinner had felt like destiny. Meeting Daniel well, the man she thought was Daniel had given her a glimpse of light at the end of a long, dim hallway. She poured herself another cup of coffee, the bitter smell grounding her. Her assistant, Mira, peeked in, her voice hesitant. The board called again. They want the final draft by tomorrow, or the deal is off. Clara nodded, forcing a steady tone. We will make it. I will finish the revisions tonight. When Mira left, the silence felt heavy again. Clara leaned back, rubbing her temples, and caught her reflection in the dark window. You can do this, she whispered. You have to. Across the city, in a high-rise of glass and steel, Alexander Reid was standing in front of a window that offered a view of the skyline stretching into the morning haze. He had not slept much either. The image of Clara laughing awkwardly across that dinner table kept returning to him the way she had spoken about fairness with such conviction, the way she had looked both nervous and brave. For years, he had met lawyers, advisors, and consultants who spoke in numbers and profits. None of them ever mentioned justice. He was supposed to attend that dinner as a test. His own board had chosen several firms, and he had decided to meet their representatives without revealing his identity, wanting to see who would act with integrity when they thought no one important was watching. Clara had not tried to charm him, flatter him, or push for a deal. She had just talked like a human being. That alone had unsettled him more than any boardroom negotiation ever had. He turned from the window, glancing at the thick folder marked Evans, Cole Legal Proposal. His chief of staff, Michael, entered the office quietly. Sir, the press is already speculating about which firm will represent us. Do you want me to announce your pick? Alexander shook his head. Not yet. I want to see how she handles the pressure. Michael raised an eyebrow. She does not know who you are, does she? Alexander's mouth curved slightly. No, and that is exactly what makes this interesting. Back in her office, Clara's phone buzzed with an incoming call. She straightened quickly, hoping for good news. Ms. Evans, this is the finance department from Reid Global, said a calm male voice. We would like to schedule another meeting to discuss the updated clauses. Her heart skipped. Of course. When would you like to meet? Tomorrow evening, the voice replied. Same restaurant, private room. She agreed instantly, not realizing that she was about to walk back into the same room with the same man, only this time, every decision she made would carry the weight of her firm's future. As the day faded into dusk, Clara closed her laptop and looked at the city lights blinking outside her window. She felt both terrified and hopeful, standing on the deck in her edge of something bigger than herself. She thought she was just negotiating a contract, but in truth, she was already rewriting her entire life story. The next evening arrived faster than Clara expected. New York's skyline shimmered in the twilight, each light flickering like a heartbeat. She stood outside the same restaurant as before, her reflection caught in the glass door. The borrowed dress had been pressed again, the same soft lavender shade that made her look braver than she felt. She took a deep breath and stepped inside, hoping that this time she would not make a fool of herself. Inside, the hum of conversation and the soft clinking of glasses wrapped around her like déjà vu. The hostess led her toward a private room at the back. When the door opened, she froze for half a second. Sitting there, perfectly composed, was the same man from the previous night. Good evening, he said, standing to greet her, his tone calm and familiar. Clara smiled awkwardly, her pulse quickening. You again? I thought I would be meeting Mr. Reid's representative. His expression did not change. You are, he replied. Let us continue where we left off. She blinked, confusion and relief tangling together. Maybe he was handling the negotiation for the investor she was supposed to meet. Either way, she could not afford to look uncertain. She took her seat, placing her folder carefully on the table. As the waiter poured the wine, she tried to keep her tone professional. I reviewed the terms again. There are a few clauses that could cause conflicts later, particularly with client protections. He nodded, eyes steady on her. You believe in protecting the small players, even when the numbers say otherwise? Yes, she said firmly. It is easy to sign away fairness when you are on the stronger side. I have seen too many deals ruin people's lives just because someone wanted an extra zero on a balance sheet. His mouth twitched into a faint smile. Most people would not say that to a client. Then most people are probably better at keeping clients than I am, she answered softly, half a joke and half a truth. He leaned back slightly, studying her with quiet fascination. Tell me something, Miss Evans. If you had power, real power, the kind that shapes companies, what would you do with it? Her eyes drifted toward the window where the city lights blurred into gold. I would build something honest, a firm that does not just survive, but helps others survive too. There was a pause, long enough for the sound of the waiter setting down their plates to fill the room. Then he said quietly, "That is rare." She smiled faintly. "So I have been told." Dinner stretched between conversation and silence, each moment pulling them closer into an unspoken rhythm. For once, Clara forgot to be nervous. She spoke freely about her late father, about the nights she stayed up rewriting contracts by candlelight when the power was cut off, about how she still believed hard work meant something. When she laughed, he found himself laughing too, surprised by how human it felt. Then it happened again, the same small accident that would later define everything. She reached for her glass, and her sleeve brushed his arm. A thin line of red spilled across the white linen. Her face turned pale. "Oh no, not again. I swear I am cursed with bad coordination." But Alexander only laughed, his voice low and warm. "It is fine. You can stop apologizing. I think the table is beginning to like you." She groaned, hiding her face in her hands, and he smiled a real smile this time. The kind that came from somewhere deep, not the practiced charm of a CEO used to boardroom performance. "Tell you what," he said, reaching for a napkin to blot the stain. "If this deal works out, I will let you choose the wine for the celebration. But no more accidents." "Deal," she said, relieved, offering her hand. "And I promise it will not be the expensive kind." He shook her hand gently, the touch lingering a second longer than it should have. Neither of them noticed how quiet the room had become, how the rest of the world seemed to fade beyond the closed door. When the dinner ended, he escorted her to the street. The night air was cool, and for a moment, she hesitated beside the curb. "Thank you for not firing me after the wine disaster," she said lightly. "On the contrary," he answered, his gaze steady. "It made me trust you more." She tilted her head, puzzled. "Why?" "Because honesty," he said, "always leaves a mark worth remembering." As she watched him disappear into a sleek black car, Clara felt an unfamiliar warmth in her chest. She did not know that the man she had just shaken hands with was not a consultant, not a representative, but the very owner of the empire she was fighting to impress. And somewhere above the skyline, Alexander Reid looked back at the reflection of her smile in the car window, wondering for the first time in years what it would feel like to be seen not as a CEO, but simply as a man. The following week felt like a blur of meetings, contracts, and unanswered emails. Clara Evans barely slept. Her days began before sunrise and ended long after the office lights had gone out. Each clause she revised, each signature she chased, felt like one more thread holding her fragile firm together. Yet, through the exhaustion, one thought kept circling in her mind, the man from the dinner. She told herself it was purely professional. He had been courteous, even kind, and had asked the sort of questions that made her think deeper about why she fought so hard for fairness. But there was something else in his eyes when he looked at her, a quiet recognition, as if he already knew who she was beneath the layers of worry and ambition. 3 days after their last meeting, her phone rang again. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice that greeted her was not. "Miss Evans," he said, "this is Alexander." She blinked, straightening in her chair. "Oh, hello. I mean, good afternoon. How are you?" "I am well," he replied evenly. "I wanted to discuss one of the provisions you added about ethical oversight. It is unusual, and I would like to understand why you insisted on it." She hesitated, then said, "It ensures transparency. It protects both sides from manipulation. It may not be standard, but it is necessary if we are going to build something sustainable." There was silence for a moment, then a soft chuckle. "You speak like someone who has seen what happens when ethics are ignored." Clara smiled faintly. "I have, too many times." "Then you have convinced me," he said. "But I would rather hear the full reasoning in person. Are you free this evening?" She almost dropped her pen. "This evening?" "Yes," he said. "Same place. It seems to bring out your honesty." She could not help laughing. "I promise to keep the wine far from your sleeve this time." When she arrived at the restaurant that night, the staff seemed to recognize her instantly. The hostess led her straight to the private room, where Alexander was already waiting, a few papers spread across the table. He stood as she entered, that calm composure never leaving him. "I ordered coffee this time," he said with a slight grin, "just in case." She smiled back, settling into her seat. Wise choice. For the next hour, they went over each section of the contract, line by line. But what began as a business meeting slowly unraveled into something more personal. Between discussions of profit margins and clauses, conversation drifted toward lighter things: music, family, how they each took their coffee. Clara spoke about her father again, about how he had built his own law practice from nothing and taught her to fight for people who had no voice. Alexander listened intently, every word sharpening his admiration for her. He found himself leaning forward, not because of the contract, but because of the quiet sincerity in her tone. "And you?" she asked suddenly. "Why law? Why this project?" He paused, searching for an answer that would not betray his real identity. "Because I have seen what happens when people forget that every decision affects someone's life. Business should not erase humanity. That is a rare thing to hear from someone in your position," she said softly. He smiled. "Maybe that is why I am here." They both fell silent. Outside the window, the city's pulse glowed against the glass cars gliding through rain-slick streets, neon reflections stretching like liquid fire. For the first time in months, Clara felt something other than stress. It was calm, fragile, and new. She was sitting across from a man she barely knew, yet something about him felt safe. When the meeting ended, Alexander walked her to the curb again. A soft drizzle had begun to fall. He handed her his umbrella, the gesture simple but strangely intimate. "Keep it," he said. "New York weather changes faster than most people's minds." She laughed, shaking her head. "You are going to make me believe chivalry still exists." "Maybe it never disappeared," he answered. "People just stopped looking for it." As she climbed into a taxi, she turned back once more. Through the rain-specked window, she saw him standing there, the city lights haloing around him like a quiet secret. What she did not see was the way he watched the taxi fade into the blur of traffic, his expression caught between admiration and guilt. He knew that every word he spoke to her, every truth he withheld, was building something delicate, and that one day, the weight of his silence might break it. But for now, he let himself believe that honesty could wait just a little longer. The rain had not stopped for 2 days. New York pulsed beneath it, restless and alive. But inside her small office, Clara Evans barely noticed the weather. She was buried under papers, her hair tied back, sleeves rolled up, a half-empty cup of coffee beside her keyboard. Each drop of rain outside sounded like a ticking clock, reminding her that the deadline for the Reid Global contract was near. Her firm was running on fumes. The receptionist worked half days now to save on payroll, and the heating unit rattled whenever she switched it on. But for the first time in months, Clara felt an odd calm in the middle of the storm. Every time she thought of Alexander, a sense of focus followed. His questions, his patience, even the way he listened, those moments had left a mark. She had worked with dozens of clients before, but none who looked at her like what she said actually mattered. She opened her sketchbook, the one she kept hidden beneath case files. Inside were notes and doodles, pages filled with scribbled thoughts and small reminders. Fairness is not weakness. Integrity pays in time. Words her father used to say when she was a child, helping him organize papers late into the night. She smiled faintly, tracing the lines of his handwriting in an old letter tucked inside the back cover. "If you lose your way, build something worth standing for." Across the city, Alexander Reid stood at the window of his penthouse, the skyline reflecting in his glass of red wine. Below, the rain streaked against the glass like silver threads. He had just ended a meeting with his board, a session full of tension and questions about the merger. "Why delay?" they demanded. "Why not choose a larger firm?" He had given them polite answers, but inside, he knew the truth. He trusted Clara's heart more than he trusted their numbers. On his desk sat a sketch she had left behind by mistake, a rough drawing on the corner of a notepad. It was a cityscape, uneven but full of life. Under it, she had written, "Every light has a story." He could not explain why that small piece of paper felt more valuable than the entire contract folder beside it. Michael, his chief of staff, entered the room, glancing between the two items. "You have been staring at that scrap of paper for 10 minutes, he said carefully. Alexander smiled, half amused, half caught. "It is strange, is it not? Sometimes the smallest things reveal more truth than 100 reports." Michael folded his arms. "Truth can also get complicated when feelings are involved." Alexander set the paper down gently. "That is what makes it worth chasing." The next afternoon, Clara's phone rang again. "Ms. Evans, this is Mr. Reid's office," said a woman's professional voice. "Mr. Reid himself would like to meet with you to finalize the agreement. Tomorrow evening, at the company's main headquarters." Her pen froze mid-sentence. "Mr. Reid himself?" she repeated. "Yes, ma'am. He would like to sign personally." Clara's heart raced. After months of waiting, she would finally meet the man whose approval could change everything. She hung up and leaned back in her chair, dizzy with excitement and nerves. She thought of calling Alexander to thank him for helping her prepare, but stopped herself. He had already done enough. Besides, she did not want to look dependent or unprofessional. That night, she stayed late at the office, double-checking every line, every clause, until the words blurred. Outside, the storm returned, and lightning flashed across the window, illuminating her tired reflection. She caught herself smiling without realizing why. Maybe it was the anticipation, or maybe it was something softer, something she did not want to name. In another part of the city, Alexander sat alone at his piano, fingers brushing the keys but not pressing them. His thoughts kept circling back to her voice, her conviction, the way she never tried to. Please him. Tomorrow, she would finally learn who he was. The truth both thrilled and terrified him. He closed his eyes and whispered into the quiet, "Please do not hate me for it." When morning came, Clara stepped out of her apartment in a black coat, the folder clutched tightly in her hands. She looked up at the tall building ahead, Reid Global headquarters. 40 floors of glass and power. She had no idea that the man waiting for her inside, the man who would soon sign her future, was the same one who had shared laughter, coffee, and confessions across candlelight. One more meeting, she thought. One more signature, and everything will change. And above her, high in the tower, Alexander Reid stood by the window again, watching the entrance below, waiting for the woman who had unknowingly redrawn the lines of his entire life. The evening shimmered with the kind of elegance only money could build. Crystal chandeliers scattered light across polished marble, and the air buzzed with champagne laughter and camera flashes. It was Reid Global's annual charity gala, a celebration that drew the city's wealthiest leaders, journalists, and power brokers under one roof. Clara Evans had never been to anything like it. Her invitation had arrived that morning, embossed in gold, signed by the Reid Global Board. She had assumed it was a formality, part of the contract signing ceremony scheduled to take place during the event. Still, she had spent the afternoon agonizing over what to wear, finally choosing a simple black gown that her friend Mira helped alter with a few pins and hopeful stitches. As she entered the ballroom, her breath caught. Every corner sparkled. Every person looked effortlessly important. She felt like an imposter walking through a dream made for someone else. Her worn heels clicked softly against the marble as she searched for the familiar face of the man who had guided her through the entire negotiation, Alexander. She spotted him near the center of the room, speaking with a group of executives. He looked different tonight, framed by the glow of flashbulbs and attention. The same calm expression, the same measured composure, but something in the way others moved around him, how they waited for him to speak, made her pause. "Clara," he greeted, his voice smooth and steady. "I am glad you came." "You did not tell me this was a black tie event," she said lightly, trying to hide her nerves. He smiled faintly. "You make it look effortless." Before she could respond, a voice echoed through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The signing of the Reid Global expansion deal will begin shortly, followed by our annual award presentation." A polite round of applause rippled across the hall. Clara felt her pulse quicken. This was it, the moment her firm had worked for, the moment her father would have been proud of. She followed Alexander toward the long table set up beneath the spotlight, where reporters and board members were already gathering. As they reached the stage, an announcer stepped forward. "Tonight, we celebrate a partnership built on integrity, innovation, and trust," he began. "And now it is my honor to introduce the man whose vision made this all possible, our chairman and chief executive officer, Mr. Alexander Reid." The applause thundered. Cameras flashed. Clara froze. For a heartbeat, she could not process the words. She turned toward him, her eyes wide. He was already looking at her, the guilt clear in his face. But the moment was too large to stop. The crowd rose in admiration as he stepped up to the podium, his name echoing through the room. Mr. Alexander Reid, the man she had shared dinners, laughter, and secrets with. The man she had spilled wine on and promised to celebrate with when the deal was done. Her hands trembled against the folder she held. The room blurred in a whirl of light and disbelief. Reporters shouted, "Questions?" The board members smiled. Alexander began to speak, his voice even, practiced years of leadership woven into every word. But Clara could barely hear him. Her thoughts raced back through every conversation, every meeting. The moments that had felt real now cracked open like glass under pressure. He had known who she was from the start. He had tested her. When the signing began, Alexander turned to her gently. "Clara, would you do the honor?" The cameras zoomed in. The crowd hushed. Her signature would finalize the deal and, in doing so, publicly bind her name to his company. Her vision blurred, but her hand moved almost by instinct, the pen gliding across the paper. The applause returned, louder than before. Yet inside her, silence grew. As she stepped away from the table, Alexander tried to reach for her arm, but she withdrew quickly. "You should have told me," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I wanted to," he said quietly. "I just wanted to see if I was good enough," she interrupted, tears forming at the edge of her voice. "Congratulations, Mr. Reid. You got your answer." Before anyone could stop her, she reached for the glass of red wine beside the table. For a single breath, the room went perfectly still. Then, without another word, she lifted it and poured it across the front of his tailored suit. Gasps filled the hall. Cameras clicked in disbelief. The deep red streaks spread across his white shirt like spilled truth. Clara placed the glass back on the table, her voice calm but trembling. "Now you will remember me not as your test, but as your mistake." She turned and walked out, the applause fading behind her into the hum of whispers and shock. In that instant, Alexander did not care about the cameras, the press, or the investors. All he saw was the woman walking away, the only person who had ever spoken to him, as if he were simply human. He stood there under the harsh light, a man finally, stripped of his control, realizing that the deal he had signed had cost him something far greater than money. The deepest secrets are about to change everything. Subscribe now to catch the dramatic twist that is coming in the next chapter. The night wind howled through the streets of Manhattan as Clara Evans stepped out of the hotel ballroom, her heels striking the marble floor like punctuation marks of fury. Behind her, the echoes of gasps and camera flashes still lingered, the scent of spilled wine following her like a ghost. She did not care. Every breath felt like fire in her lungs, every heartbeat like the echo of betrayal. She had trusted him. She had spoken to him as an equal, not as a billionaire, not as a client, but as a man she thought she could believe in. And he had lied. The thought of every conversation replayed in her mind, his questions, his calm tone, his quiet smile. All of it had been a test. When she reached the curb, she realized she had no idea where to go. Her apartment was across town, but her hands were shaking too badly to call a cab. The city lights blurred through her tears. She leaned against a cold pillar, gripping her clutch, whispering to herself, "You will not cry, not for him." Inside, Alexander Reid stood motionless on the stage, his once perfect image stained with dark red wine. The applause had stopped long ago, replaced by murmurs and the buzz of journalists desperate to capture his reaction. But he said nothing. He simply watched the door she had disappeared through, his throat tight, his chest hollow. Michael approached him quietly. "Sir, the board wants to know what to say to the press." Alexander's voice came out low, steady, but stripped of its usual authority. "Tell them the truth." That integrity costs more than we think. Later that night, his office felt larger than usual, empty, echoing, cold. He removed his jacket, the faint smell of wine still clinging to it. For the first time in years, he did not open his laptop or look at the reports stacked neatly on his desk. He just stared at the city below, where rain had begun to fall again, washing the streets clean. He thought of her face, how her expression had shifted from confusion to hurt, and then to quiet defiance. She had not shouted, had not begged for an explanation. She had simply walked away, leaving him with nothing but silence. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded paper. It was her sketch, the cityscape she had drawn absent-mindedly during their meeting. The pencil lines were smudged now, but the words beneath were still clear. Every light has a story. He whispered the line aloud, his voice breaking for the first time in years. Every light, even mine. Across town, Clara finally reached her apartment. She dropped her shoes by the door and stood in the dark, shaking. Her phone buzzed again and again, calls from reporters, from clients, even from her assistant, but she ignored them all. She sank onto the couch, staring at the dim outline of the city beyond her window. Somewhere in that maze of glass towers, he was probably sitting in his own silence, just as lost. But she did not want to think about him anymore. She had spent her whole life building trust out of fragile pieces, and now one man had shattered it with a single lie. As she closed her eyes, her tears finally fell, not out of weakness, but release. The truth was out, the mask was gone, and somewhere inside the storm of hurt, a quiet strength began to rise. 3 days passed, and the story had already spread across every news outlet in the city. The billionaire and the wine glass scandal, headlines screamed, while gossip sites replayed the same clip of Clara Evans pouring red wine over Alexander Reid's suit. Strangers debated her motives online, some calling her reckless, others calling her brave. But Clara refused to read any of it. She buried herself in work, ignoring the cameras parked near her office door, focusing on closing the firm's smaller cases to keep her team afloat. She told herself she did not care what people thought, that she did what her conscience demanded. Yet, each night when she walked home through the rain, she could not stop seeing his face, the look of guilt and heartbreak frozen in the spotlight. She had not meant to humiliate him. She had meant to reclaim her dignity. But the line between justice and anger had blurred that night, and now she carried both. On the fourth morning, a letter arrived without a return address. The envelope was heavy, sealed with a dark wax imprint that simply read, Reid Foundation. Inside, there was an invitation, the value of truth, an exhibition honoring ethical voices in business and law. Her name was printed at the bottom as special guest of honor. Clara nearly tore it in half. "Is this his idea of an apology?" she whispered, tossing it onto her desk. But the curiosity gnawed at her all day, until she finally decided to go, if only to face him one last time. That evening, she walked into a large art hall transformed into a gallery of photographs and quotes. The lights were soft, the walls lined with images of people who had stood up for honesty, activists, lawyers, founders. And right at the center stood a massive portrait, Clara, mid-motion, pouring wine in that unforgettable moment. But beneath the picture, the caption was not mocking. It read, "Integrity is never a mistake. It is a mirror that reveals who we truly are." Her breath caught. Around her, guests murmured in admiration, some even applauding quietly. Then she heard his voice behind her. "I wanted the world to see what courage looks like." She turned. Alexander stood there in a dark suit. No cameras, no entourage, just him. He looked older, humbler. "I deserved what you did," he said simply, "but I needed you to know this. After that night, I dissolved the testing program that led to our meeting. I donated a portion of the merger funds to create scholarships for small law firms under your name." Clara stared at him, words failing her. "Why?" "Because you reminded me that truth matters more than power," he replied, "and because I do not want my apology to be just words." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them felt different now, not heavy with lies, but quiet with understanding. Finally, Clara sighed. "You hurt me, Alexander. You made me feel like a lesson in your experiment." "I know," he said softly. And I will spend as long as it takes proving that you were never a lesson. You were the reason I changed." She looked back at the portrait, the crimson wine captured mid-air like frozen honesty, and then back at him. Maybe some lessons are worth learning the hard way. For the first time, she saw him not as the billionaire who deceived her, but as a man willing to rebuild himself. The walls between them did not vanish, but they finally began to crack. The music swelled in the distance as the exhibition lights dimmed, leaving them standing together beneath her photograph. Their story reframed not as a scandal, but as a reckoning that had finally found its peace. 1 year later, the city had changed its stories. The tabloids that once mocked her had moved on, and the name Clara Evans now appeared in a very different kind of headline. Her firm had grown, small but respected, known for representing community projects and startups built on ethical principles. The scholarship fund under her name had already helped dozens of young lawyers begin their own honest practices. It was late afternoon when Clara walked through the quiet halls of the Metropolitan Art Gallery. A new exhibition had just opened, The Art of Integrity. She had been invited as a guest, not realizing who the main sponsor was, until she saw the name on the banner at the entrance, Reid Global Foundation. She smiled softly, shaking her head. "He never stops surprising me," she whispered. Inside, the walls were lined with paintings, each depicting a story of redemption. At the center stood a glass case holding a single, framed photograph, the one that had started it all. The image of her pouring wine across a billionaire's chest, frozen in time. Only now, beneath it, the caption had changed. It read, "One act of courage can rewrite the definition of love." She felt a quiet warmth spread through her. Behind her, footsteps echoed gently against the marble. She turned, and there he was, Alexander Reid, older, calmer, still carrying that look of quiet humility that success could never disguise again. "You came," he said, his voice carrying that soft steadiness she remembered. "You invited me," she replied. "I was curious to see what you would turn this into." "A reminder," he said, walking closer, "that mistakes can become milestones." He reached into his pensions pocket and pulled out a small object, a delicate silver key attached to a folded card. "The key to the new office for the foundation. It is in both our names now. I thought it should belong to the person who taught me what leadership really means." Clara hesitated, her heart caught between disbelief and gratitude. "You do not owe me anything, Alexander." He shook his head. "It is not debt. It is a promise." He placed the key in her hand, his fingers brushing hers. "You once said you wanted to build something honest. Let us build it together." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The gallery was silent except for the distant hum of city traffic outside. Then she smiled, a slow, genuine smile that carried both forgiveness and beginning. "I suppose," she said softly. "We can call this the real contract." He laughed quietly. "One with no loopholes, I hope." "None," she replied. "Just truth." The lights around them dimmed as evening settled. Beyond the glass windows, the city glowing like a sea of gold. They stood side by side, not as CEO and attorney, not as mistake and victim, but as two people who had finally learned that integrity and love were never separate things. Their story had begun with a wrong table, a wrong name, and a spilled glass of wine, but it ended with something right. Thank you for joining us for this cinematic adventure. If you want more untold or real stories of billionaire love and redemption, please subscribe and choose your next true heart journey on your screen now.